Are you ready to dive into a chilling tale? Turn off the lights, settle in, and let the shadows tell their secrets. Tonight, we journey to Willow Creek Manor, a place haunted not just by the past, but by something far darker. Once a grand estate, Willow Creek Manor now sits abandoned, shrouded in mist and mystery. Locals warn that its halls hold restless spirits and secrets better left undisturbed. But when siblings Alex and Emma inherit the manor, they can't resist uncovering what lies within. Part 1. The Invitation. Alex and Emma hadn't thought about Willow Creek Manor since childhood, back when their grandmother would spin tales of the old family estate hidden in the misty hills. The manor was practically a legend, a grand estate that had fallen to ruin long ago, shrouded in mystery and ghost stories. Locals spoke of strange noises, flickering lights, and an ominous presence lurking within its walls. Most people avoided it, calling it cursed. So, when Alex and Emma received a letter claiming they had inherited the manor from a distant uncle, it felt like a story come to life. The letter had one condition: they had to stay there for 7 days to claim ownership. Alex, ever curious, convinced Emma to go. He saw it as an adventure, a chance to explore the history of their family and the mystery that had surrounded the manor for years. Emma hesitated but finally agreed, hoping it would be nothing more than a spooky experience they'd laugh about later. Now, standing at the edge of the property, both felt their excitement waver. Willow Creek Manor loomed before them, shrouded in fog, its ivy-covered walls rising like dark stone guardians. The grand wooden door was slightly open, as if inviting them in. 7 days. "We can handle that," Alex said, trying to sound confident. Emma gave a half-hearted nod, clutching the flashlight tighter. They pushed open the door, and a gust of stale, cold air greeted them. Dust blanketed every surface inside, and the scent of mildew hung thick in the air. Their footsteps echoed off the walls as they stepped into the grand foyer. The high ceiling and remnants of elegance hinted at a time when the manor had been beautiful. The siblings wandered through room after room, their flashlight beams casting eerie shadows. Furniture was draped in dusty sheets, and portraits of ancestors lined the walls. The faces in the paintings seemed to follow them with hollow, watchful eyes. Every so often, Emma would glance over her shoulder, feeling like something was lurking just out of sight. "This place is creepier than I expected," Emma muttered, eyeing the peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. "It's old, that's all," Alex replied, though he, too, felt a sense of unease settling over him. They found their way upstairs, climbing the grand staircase. The steps creaked under their weight, and the narrow hallway on the second floor stretched out, lined with doors on either side. Each door seemed to lead to a bedroom, stripped bare except for broken furniture and peeling wallpaper. Dust swirled in the flashlight beams, making the air feel even heavier. Finally, they found a bedroom that looked somewhat livable. They set up sleeping bags on the floor and made sure their flashlights were close by. Night fell quickly, and soon, shadows stretched across the walls, filling the room with an oppressive silence. As they lay there, trying to sleep, a faint scratching sound came from somewhere within the walls. It was slow and deliberate, like something, or someone, moving around, inching closer with each second. Emma's eyes flew open, and she nudged Alex. "Did you hear that?" Alex sat up, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. "It's probably just an animal," he whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. The scratching grew louder, then stopped. They held their breath, listening to the silence that followed. Just as they began to relax, a loud bang echoed down the hall, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Emma gripped Alex's arm, her voice barely a whisper. "Alex, what was that?" They stayed frozen, ears straining, but the sounds had faded. After a few tense moments, they decided to investigate. Grabbing their flashlights, they stepped cautiously into the hallway. The air was colder out here, the shadows darker and more oppressive. They followed faint marks in the dust on the floor, leading them to a door at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and a dim light flickered inside, casting strange shadows on the walls. Alex pushed the door open, revealing a small study. The room was filled with shelves lined with dusty books, a large desk, and a mirror hanging on the wall. The mirror's glass was cracked and warped, but something about it drew them in. As they approached, they noticed faint scratches on the mirror's surface, like claw marks, as though someone had tried to scratch their way through the glass. And in the reflection, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Behind them, standing in the doorway, was a shadowy figure, watching them with hollow, empty eyes. They spun around, but the doorway was empty. The figure had vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. They turned back to the mirror, but the scratches had disappeared, and the room was dark once more. Emma swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it's not just haunted. It's alive." Alex nodded, his face pale as he backed away from the mirror. "We need to be careful. I don't think we're alone here." They returned to their makeshift bedroom, each of them feeling the weight of the manor pressing down on them as if it were watching, waiting. The shadows seemed to creep closer, and both felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes following them in the darkness. As they lay down, both siblings found sleep impossible, their minds racing with thoughts of what they had seen. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal its secrets. And they knew, deep down, that Willow Creek Manor wouldn't let them go without a fight. Part 2. Whispers in the Walls. The night at Willow Creek Manor had been anything but restful. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified in the silence, filling Alex and Emma with an unshakable dread. They had tried to convince themselves it was just an old, creaky building, but both had heard the faint, disturbing whispers drifting through the walls. Neither could shake the feeling that they were not alone. By morning, they decided to explore further, hoping to uncover a logical explanation for the strange sounds. "If we find something that explains all of this, maybe we'll feel better," Alex suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. The siblings ventured into the east wing, a part of the house filled with relics of the past, dusty furniture, mirrors coated in grime, and bookshelves lined with yellowed, brittle pages. In one room, Emma found an old wooden chest. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its pages fragile with age. The journal, written in a shaky hand, detailed life in the manor, but quickly grew darker, with entries describing sightings of shadowy figures, unsettling noises, and a creeping feeling of being watched. One entry caught their attention. "The house whispers at night, speaks secrets I cannot understand. Shadows shift, and I feel as if I am not alone. I fear the house itself has a soul, one that remembers and waits." Emma shivered as she closed the journal. It felt as if their ancestor had left a warning, a message for anyone who would come after. "This isn't just some ghost story, Alex. It sounds like the house itself is alive," she murmured. Determined to find answers, they moved to the west wing, where the air felt colder, the shadows denser. They found a room filled with disturbing sketches pinned to the walls, drawings of dark, twisted shapes and faces half hidden in the shadows. The images looked desperate, as though the artist had been trying to capture something terrifying they had seen. Alex picked up one of the sketches, his brow furrowing. What was this person trying to show? And why does it look like they were so afraid? Before Emma could respond, a faint whisper drifted through the room, filling the air. It was so soft they couldn't understand the words, but the tone was chilling. They backed out of the room, the whisper following them, growing louder as if the house itself was trying to speak to them. Hurrying down the hall, they found themselves in the main foyer again. The whispers faded, leaving only silence, but an oppressive feeling hung in the air, as though the manor was watching. Emma clutched her arms, shivering. "Alex, I don't care about the inheritance. This house feels wrong. I think we should leave." But Alex was resolute. "We came here for a reason, Emma. If there's something dark in this house, we should try to understand it. Maybe we can break whatever's holding it here." That night, as they settled into their room, the house grew darker, the shadows more menacing. They heard every creak, every rustle, each one making their nerves fray. Just as they were starting to drift off, a loud crash from downstairs jolted them awake. Grabbing their flashlights, they crept toward the noise. In the parlor, they found a large portrait lying on the floor, the glass shattered, the frame splintered. It depicted a family, their ancestors, standing solemnly in front of the manor. Though the faces were faded, the expressions were unsettling, as though they held a deep, hidden sorrow. "These were our relatives," Emma whispered. "Do you think they experienced what we are?" Before Alex could answer, they heard scratching again, this time louder and closer, echoing through the walls as if something was crawling toward them. And then, just beneath the scratching, they heard a voice, cold and hollow, whispering through the silence. "You shouldn't have come." The words sent chills down their spines. It wasn't a warning, it felt like a threat, an acknowledgement that they had disturbed something dark. Panic rising, they hurried back to their room, each step filled with the sense that they were being watched. As they shut the door, they could hear the scratching from within the walls, a constant reminder that something was lurking just beyond the edge of the light. That night, sleep eluded them as the realization settled over them: Willow Creek Manor wasn't just haunted. It was aware, and whatever secrets it held, it intended to keep them. As they sat in silence, the weight of the house pressing down on them, they began to hear faint sounds outside their door. It started with soft, almost delicate footsteps, pacing back and forth in the hallway, each step deliberate and unnervingly calm. Then, just when they thought the sound would fade, it grew louder, closer, until it felt as though someone was standing just outside the door. Emma gripped Alex's hand, her knuckles white. "Do you think someone's there?" He shook his head, his face tense. "I don't know, but I'm not opening that door." The footsteps paused, and then there was a soft scratching at the door, like nails gently dragging down the wood. It was a chilling, grating sound, one that seemed to resonate through their bones. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a soft whisper slipped through the cracks around the door, as if whatever was outside was trying to seep in. The voice was faint but distinct, carrying a warning that filled them both with dread. "Leave, before it's too late." They held their breath, frozen, as the scratching slowly stopped. The footsteps receded down the hall, each step fainter, until there was nothing left but silence. For several minutes, neither of them spoke, too terrified to move. Finally, Alex whispered, "I think it's time we listen to the warnings, Emma." She nodded, still gripping his hand tightly. "This house isn't just haunted by memories. It's alive, and I don't think it wants us here." With dawn approaching, they knew they'd have to decide soon. Would they uncover the secrets of Willow Creek Manor, or would they heed the warnings and escape while they still could? Part 3. The Unseen. After a restless night, Alex and Emma woke to a cold, dim morning in Willow Creek Manor. The memories of footsteps pacing outside their door and the chilling whispers felt like a lingering shadow over their minds. They sat in silence, each of them haunted by the events of the previous night. The warnings they had heard in the darkness were hard to ignore, but curiosity still gnawed at them. What if there's something here that we're supposed to understand? Alex finally said. "Maybe if we uncover the manor's secrets, it'll leave us alone." Emma shook her head, her face pale. "And what if it wants us to stay here forever? This house, it doesn't feel right. Maybe we should listen to the warnings." Despite her fears, she agreed to continue exploring. They ventured into the northern wing of the manor, where the air felt heavier, colder. Dust floated through the beams of their flashlights as they moved through the rooms. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, and the furniture was draped in sheets, casting eerie shapes that seemed to shift in the dim light. They found themselves in a small library, its walls lined with shelves full of old, worn books. In the center of the room stood a desk, covered in papers and strange sketches. Alex noticed a large, leather-bound book lying open, its pages filled with symbols and phrases he couldn't understand. "Look at this," he whispered, showing Emma the strange book. The pages seemed to describe rituals and protective spells, though neither of them could make much sense of it. Emma flipped to a page near the end where the handwriting had grown messy and frantic. The final entry read, "The manor is watching. Each room, each wall, every shadow hides a memory. It won't let me leave, but maybe there's a way to break its hold. I must be careful, for it sees everything." Emma looked up, her face etched with worry. "Do you think this person was trapped here? Just like us?" Alex nodded, a chill running down his spine. "Maybe they figured out something about the manor, something that kept them here. It's like the house doesn't want its secrets to leave." They continued to search the library, hoping to find more clues. As Emma reached for a book on the shelf, her fingers brushed against something cold. She pulled back, realizing there was a small hidden compartment behind the shelf. She pried it open, revealing a worn, dusty journal. The journal's pages were fragile and yellowed with age. The entries inside were brief, each one a cryptic note that described strange occurrences in the manor. But as Emma read further, she found an entry that sent a chill through her. "The whispers are growing louder. I can see them now, figures in the corner of my eye. They move through the walls, following me, watching my every step. I tried to leave, but every door brought me back here. I am a prisoner, bound to this house, just as it is bound to me." Emma swallowed hard, glancing at Alex. "It sounds like they were trapped, like the manor wouldn't let them go." Alex took a deep breath, his face pale but determined. "If we're dealing with something that's trying to trap us, we need to find a way out, fast." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere nearby, shattering the silence. They froze, exchanging a fearful glance before following the sound. It led them down a narrow hallway to a small, dimly lit room that neither of them remembered passing before. Inside, they found an overturned chair and a mirror hanging on the wall. The glass was cracked, and faint scratches covered its surface, as though someone had tried to claw their way through. But what caught their attention was the figure in the reflection, a shadowy form that seemed to waver, half visible in the dim light. The figure had no face, but its hollow eyes seemed to lock onto them, watching with an intensity that made their skin crawl. Emma backed away, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you see that?" Alex nodded, his hand gripping her arm. "Let's get out of here." They turned to leave, but as they stepped into the hallway, the door slammed shut behind them. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, and the shadows seemed to deepen, wrapping around them like a shroud. A whisper echoed through the air, filling the hallway. "Stay with us." They tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rising, they looked around, feeling the presence closing in on them, watching, waiting. It was as though the house itself was trying to seal them in, drawing them deeper into its darkness. Finally, with a desperate shove, they managed to open the door. They stumbled out into the hallway, breathless and shaken, their hearts pounding. "We need to go back to our room, regroup," Alex said, his voice unsteady. Emma nodded, and they hurried back down the winding halls, each turn feeling more disorienting than the last. As they finally reached their room, they collapsed onto the floor, too overwhelmed to speak. The presence that had followed them seemed to fade, but the oppressive weight of the house remained. After a long silence, Emma spoke, her voice trembling. "Alex, I don't think we can stay here for another night. It's not safe." Alex's face was grim, his resolve weakened. "I don't want to give up, but maybe you're right. Whatever this place is, it's trying to keep us here, and I don't know how much longer we can hold out." That night, as they lay in the darkness, they felt the shadows shifting around them, a constant reminder of the unseen forces lurking just beyond the light. They could hear the faintest whispers drifting through the walls, carrying fragments of voices, as if the manor itself were alive with memories of the past. As dawn approached, they realized that Willow Creek Manor wasn't just a house. It was a keeper of secrets, a place bound by dark forces. And if they didn't leave soon, they might never escape its grasp. Just as they began to relax, convinced dawn might finally bring peace, a deep thud echoed from below. Alex and Emma's eyes met, their expressions mirroring shared fear. The sound had come from beneath them, maybe even the foundation. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, gripping her sleeping bag. Alex nodded, his face pale. from below us. With flashlights in hand, they moved down the hall, discovering a narrow door under the main staircase. It was partially open, leading to a staircase descending into darkness, as if the house itself was urging them to delve deeper. The narrow staircase creaked as they descended, each step plunging them deeper into the cold, damp air below. Their flashlights flickered, barely cutting through the darkness. As they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a small stone-walled cellar. The walls were covered in faint, strange symbols scratched into the stone, as if someone had tried to leave a message or ward off something unseen. In the center of the room lay a battered old trunk. Alex knelt, hesitating, then opened it slowly. Inside, faded drawings showed twisted faces and shadowy figures, a horrifying reminder of the manor's haunted past. With the unsettling discoveries of the cellar still fresh in their minds, Alex and Emma returned upstairs, dread growing as they realized the house's secrets were far darker than they'd imagined. Part 4. The Ritual Room. The cold air outside should have brought relief, but instead, it only deepened the fear gnawing at my chest. We had escaped the hospital, or so we thought, but the strange, suffocating presence seemed to linger around us, clinging to us like a shadow we couldn't shake. Dan looked back at the building, his face pale. Why? Why does it feel like it's still watching us? Mark pulled up his sleeve, revealing a bruise where one of the shadowy figures had touched him. It was dark, pulsing, almost alive. I glanced down at my own arm, finding a similar mark, dark and cold, like an imprint left by the shadows that still haunted us. We need to get out of here, I said, forcing down the panic that bubbled up inside. We started walking, putting distance between us and the hospital. But no matter how far we went, the building remained visible, looming over us like it was still pulling us back. Every road we took, every turn, led us back to its shadowed entrance, as if we were trapped in a loop with no way out. This is impossible, Dan muttered, panic rising in his voice. It's like we're not actually going anywhere. Mark clenched his jaw, his face filled with fear. It's not letting us leave. I think we're still trapped. The realization sank in with a chilling certainty. It wasn't enough to simply walk away. The hospital had claimed us, and it wasn't going to let us go without something in return. Mark looked back at the building, his gaze fixed on the door. The book, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I took it from the altar. It was a part of this place, and now it won't let us go. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. The book. Mark had taken it, breaking some ancient, unspoken rule. Whatever curse bound that place was now bound to us too. We're not going back in there, Dan insisted, his voice shaking. But we all knew there was no other choice. The hospital wasn't going to let us leave until we returned what we'd taken, until we put things back the way they were. Reluctantly, we turned back toward the hospital, dread settling in my bones. It felt like the building was waiting for us, watching with cold, unfeeling eyes. When we reached the doors, they were open, inviting us back in. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle, feeling the chill emanating from within. Every instinct screamed to run, but we were past the point of escape. We stepped inside, and the doors shut heavily behind us, sealing us in. The air was colder, thicker, as though the hospital had tightened its grip. Our footsteps echoed down the silent halls as we made our way to the room where Mark had found the book. When we reached the room, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the darkness was so thick that our flashlights barely cut through it. The stone altar was there, its surface cracked and worn, the strange symbols etched deeply into it. And there, lying in the center, was the book. Mark stepped forward, his face set with grim determination. If I put it back, maybe it will let us go. He placed the book back on the altar, and we waited, our breaths held. But the silence only grew heavier, colder. Nothing changed. The shadows around us seemed to thicken, as if mocking us. It's not enough, I whispered, a sickening dread creeping over me. It's not just the book. This place wants something more. Dan's face drained of color. What do you mean? Mark stared at the altar, his face pale but resolute. It needs a sacrifice. Blood, or something else. It's part of the ritual. The words sent a chill through me. The hospital wasn't just a building, it was a trap, a twisted labyrinth that demanded something in return for our escape. We had taken something from it, and now, to leave, we'd have to give something back. Mark took out a pocket knife, his hand trembling as he held it over his palm. If blood is what it needs, then that's what it will get. Before I could stop him, he cut a shallow line across his palm, letting a few drops fall onto the altar. The room seemed to react, the air thickening as a faint vibration rippled through the floor. The shadows shifted, pulling back slightly, as though they were watching. But it wasn't enough. The silence gave way to whispers, growing louder, filling the room with a tortured chorus of voices, crying, pleading, angry. The shadows pressed in again, their hollow eyes fixed on us, their forms reaching, clawing toward us. Dan's voice shook as he whispered, What more does it want? Mark stepped back, his face pale, his hand bleeding. I don't know. But I understood. The hospital didn't just want blood, it wanted something deeper, something we each had to give. A part of ourselves. Without thinking, I placed my hand on the altar, feeling its cold, rough surface. A strange sensation filled me, as if something was being pulled from me, a memory, an emotion. I could feel it slipping away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. Dan followed suit, his hand trembling as he touched the altar. A similar look crossed his face, a mix of pain and loss, as if a piece of him had been taken. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence. The shadows withdrew, their forms dissolving back into the darkness, watching us with cold, unfeeling eyes. We stumbled back from the altar, the weight of the hospital's presence lifting slightly. The room felt less oppressive, as though the building had loosened its grip. It's done, Mark whispered, relief and exhaustion etched into his face. Let's go. We turned and made our way back through the dark corridors, each step feeling lighter, freer, as if the hospital was finally releasing us. We reached the main doors, and for the first time, they opened easily, letting in the cool night air. As we stepped outside, the oppressive feeling lifted, replaced by a quiet, empty calm. We had escaped. But as we walked away, I noticed the bruises on our arms, darker than before, spreading like shadows beneath our skin. They were marks, reminders of the price we had paid, of the part of ourselves we'd left behind. And in the back of my mind, I could still hear the whispers, faint but insistent, like an echo that would follow me forever. As they caught their breath outside, Alex and Emma stared back at Willow Creek Manor, its shadowed form towering ominously in the moonlight. They could feel the house's gaze, as if it was marking them, unwilling to release them completely. The night was silent, yet the memory of the figure's hollow eyes and the whispers still echoed in their minds, filling them with a dread that lingered even in the open air. We can't leave it like this, Alex said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. If we go now, whatever's in there, it could keep drawing people back. We have to end this. Emma looked at him, her eyes wide with fear but a spark of determination growing within. Then we'll go back. But this time, we have to find the source of whatever's holding it here. Their decision made, they turned back to the house, the darkness seeming to grow deeper, as if waiting for their return. Part 5, Into the Heart of Darkness. Steeling themselves, Alex and Emma re-entered Willow Creek Manor, a cold draft swirling as they stepped into the foyer. Every instinct told them to flee, yet they pressed forward. If there was a way to end this, they needed to find it now. The symbols, Alex whispered. They seemed to keep whatever it was at bay. Emma nodded, clutching her flashlight. The symbols bought us time, but we need the source, whatever binds that presence here. They ventured deeper into the manor, their flashlights casting shadows over faded wallpaper and cracked floorboards. The oppressive atmosphere was almost tangible, every creak amplified as if the house itself was tracking their steps. As they passed the sitting room, Emma paused, drawn to the painting of the sorrowful woman with dark eyes and a solemn gaze. Emma felt certain she was connected to the darkness around them. Do you think she's part of this? Emma whispered. Alex glanced at the portrait. She might be the reason this all started. In the library, they found a family Bible. Faded notes identified the woman as Lillian Blackwood, a name linked to a date of death within the manor. "She's one of us," Alex whispered. "Lillian Blackwood died in this house." Emma shivered. "Maybe she's bound here, never released." Just as the words left her mouth, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting into distorted shapes that seemed to reach toward them. "Let's go," Alex said. They climbed the second-floor stairs, reaching a locked door at the end of the hall. The handle was cold and stiff, but closer inspection revealed faint symbols etched into the wood, symbols like those in the cellar. "It's another ward," Emma said. "This must be important." With effort, Alex forced the lock, opening a dark, narrow staircase descending into the manor's depths. They moved carefully, the shadows thickening around them. At the bottom, they entered a large stone room. Symbols covered the walls, and in the center was a small, weathered chest. Emma opened it to find a faded photograph of the woman from the painting. Beneath lay an old letter, revealing the manor's dark history. "Asterisk Lillian, I know the family curse burdens you. The rituals keep darkness contained, but at a cruel price. You are its guardian, the binding force that keeps the shadows at bay. You are our only hope. Asterisk." Emma's voice trembled. She was bound here to keep the darkness contained. Alex looked around, a terrible realization dawning. The house is angry because we disturbed her vigil. She's holding the darkness back. A sudden gust extinguished their flashlights. In the pitch dark, footsteps echoed through the room. A faint glow appeared, revealing Lillian Blackwood, a hollow-eyed figure standing before them, her expression pleading. She raised her hand toward the symbols on the wall, as if urging them to act. Emma's fear melted into empathy. "She's trapped. We need to free her." They quickly scratched away the symbols, and with each one removed, Lillian's form grew stronger, more real. As they erased the final symbol, she glowed with a soft light, her expression one of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and ethereal. "The darkness was my burden. Now, it can finally rest." Her form dissolved into the air, leaving a warm glow in the room. But just then, a deep rumbling filled the air. The walls trembled, and dust fell from the ceiling. In freeing Lillian, they'd unleashed something powerful, angry, and determined to keep its hold on the house. "Run!" Emma shouted, grabbing Alex's hand. They raced up the staircase as the manor shook, doors slamming shut and corridors narrowing. Finally, they reached the main floor, but the front door stood locked. Desperation surged as they pushed, but it wouldn't budge. Remembering the photograph, Alex held it to the door, feeling a strange energy pulse from it. With one final push, the door creaked open, and they spilled into the night air. Willow Creek Manor loomed behind them, silent and dark, as though drained of life. They had escaped, but the memory of the shadows would forever haunt them, a reminder of the darkness that had once plagued its halls. As they stood outside in the cold night, catching their breath, Alex and Emma stared back at Willow Creek Manor. The house loomed in the moonlight, silent yet filled with a strange intensity, as if it were daring them to return. "We're not done here," Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. "Lillian may be free, but something else is still bound here, waiting." Emma's gaze remained fixed on the manor, where a flicker of light appeared in one of the upper windows, the same room where they'd first felt the house's eerie pull. "Do we go back?" Emma whispered. They both knew they couldn't leave yet. With a shared nod, they re-entered the house, the front door swinging open as if inviting them. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, almost watchful. Following the faint glow to the second floor, they entered a room where a large, leather-bound book lay on the floor, covered in strange symbols that pulsed faintly with dark energy. Alex knelt, hesitating before opening it, then recoiled as images of trapped souls, shadows, and dark rituals flashed in his mind. "It's a guide," Alex whispered. "This book holds everything, the rituals that bound the darkness and the instructions to finally end it." Emma read the final page, a ritual to sever the connection binding the darkness to the house. The last words carried a warning: once begun, the ritual cannot be stopped. "Let's end this," Emma said, her voice steady. They gathered the materials listed, setting up the ritual circle. As they chanted, a darkness formed in the corner, the figure's hollow eyes watching them, its clawed hand reaching out, only to recoil from the protective circle. As their voices rose, the darkness thrashed, dissolving until silence filled the house. They had broken the curse. Part 6. The final confrontation. With the house silent, Alex and Emma took in the calm that had settled over Willow Creek Manor. The oppressive energy seemed to have lifted, replaced by an eerie stillness. It felt as though the house was finally at peace. But just as they let themselves relax, an icy gust swept through the room, extinguishing their candles. In the darkness, a soft, unmistakable whisper echoed through the walls, "It's not over." Emma's eyes widened, fear tightening in her chest. "Did you hear that?" Alex nodded, his jaw clenched. "Something's still here, something we missed." They felt it, the presence of a dark force, lurking beyond their sight. They had freed Lillian and broken the original ritual's binding, but it seemed they had stirred an even older force. Determined to end it, they made their way to the library, where the leather-bound book lay open on the floor. Pages shimmered in the dim light, showing mornings and rituals far more complex than before. Emma's gaze landed on a passage. Asterisk to sever the final connection, one must face the darkness within the heart of the house. The shadow is bound to no spirit. It is of the house itself. Asterisk. What does that mean? Emma whispered. This darkness wasn't tied to a person, it was created by the house itself. Alex read over her shoulder, his expression darkening. We didn't just awaken a ghost, we awakened the house. The cold crept along the floor, wrapping around their ankles. The air thickened, and the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if the house were alive. According to this, the only way to end it is to confront it in the heart of the house, Alex said. There's a hidden room where the original ritual was performed. Emma nodded, shivering. Then that's where we have to go. Following the instructions, they moved deeper into the manor, the shadows gathering along the walls. Finally, they reached a small door concealed by a faded tapestry. The door opened, revealing a dark staircase. As they descended, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence filled the space. The walls were lined with symbols pulsing faintly, guiding their way to a large, open chamber. At the center was a cracked, weathered stone altar. Symbols covered its surface, and the room buzzed with an energy so dark they could feel it vibrating through their bones. Emma's flashlight flickered, illuminating the altar long enough to see a shadowy figure, a tall, gaunt shape with hollow eyes, watching them in silence. This is it, Alex whispered. The heart of the darkness. They approached the altar, the cold becoming unbearable. The figure raised a hand, pointing to an unmarked symbol on the altar. Alex and Emma exchanged a look, realizing this was the final seal. Are you ready? Alex asked, his voice trembling. Emma nodded. Let's end this. As they traced the symbol with chalk, the figure grew larger, its shadow stretching until it covered every surface. The air grew heavier, pressing down as the figure let out a low, guttural sound, the shadows closing in. With the final symbol traced, a flash of light filled the room. They saw the figure clearly, a creature of darkness with soulless eyes, its clawed hand reaching out, desperate to hold on to the last of its power. But as the light faded, the figure dissolved, breaking apart like smoke. Shadows receded, leaving the room empty. They had done it. The darkness was gone. Relieved, Emma whispered, "It's over." But as they turned to leave, the walls began to tremble. Cracks spread across the stone, the ground shifting beneath their feet. The house was collapsing. "Run!" Alex shouted, grabbing Emma's hand. They raced up the stairs, the house crumbling around them. Finally, they reached the main floor, dodging debris as they sprinted toward the front door. At last, they burst through the door, stumbling onto the lawn as Willow Creek Manor collapsed, reduced to rubble in a cloud of dust and smoke. The house was silent, the darkness buried within the ruins. As dawn broke, Alex and Emma stood together, knowing they'd freed the house and themselves from the shadows that once haunted its halls. They had confronted the darkness and emerged victorious. Willow Creek Manor would haunt no one again. As Alex and Emma stood outside, relief washed over them. But a creeping unease lingered. Something was wrong. A faint, rhythmic tapping rose from the ruins, growing louder, more insistent, as if the house itself were calling out to them. Emma's face went pale. "Alex, I don't think it's over." Before they could react, a cold gust swept up from the rubble, swirling shadows coalescing into a dark, towering figure with hollow, furious eyes, its shape flickering like smoke. The air grew frigid, pressing down on them, filling them with a familiar dread. "We need to end this," Alex said, his voice shaking. Remembering the symbols, they scraped one into the ground, chanting the final words from the ritual. The figure wavered, shadows retreating slightly, but it surged forward again, angrier, the shadows reaching to pull them back into the ruins. Desperation set in, but their voices held steady. Slowly, the shadows began to fade, dissolving with the dawn's light. Just as they thought the shadows were fading, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them, and the dark figure reappeared, more menacing than before. The shadows seemed to gain strength from their hesitation, pulsing with an unnatural energy. It was as if the house, or what remained of it, was drawing the darkness back to life, desperate to reclaim its hold. Alex took a step back, his gaze locked on the figure. It's feeding off of our fear." Emma's voice trembled, but she steadied herself. "Then we need to show it we're not afraid. We freed Lillian, we can end this too." Together, they began repeating the chant, their voices rising against the oppressive cold. The shadows recoiled slightly, but the figure held its ground, its hollow eyes narrowing as it reached out a claw-like hand toward them. Realizing the chant wasn't enough, Alex gripped Emma's hand tightly. "Focus. We're stronger than it is." Their determination seemed to weaken the figure's form. With a final shout, they finished the chant, watching as the shadows disintegrated, the figure dissolving into a faint wisp that vanished with the first light of dawn. The shadows seemed to dissolve in the dawn's light, and Alex and Emma felt a wave of relief as the darkness faded. But just as they turned to leave, a faint, chilling whisper echoed from the ruins. "Not finished." The words sent a shiver down their spines, and they realized the curse might still cling to the very foundation of the manor. Emma looked at Alex, determination hardening her expression. "We've come this far. Whatever's left, we have to end it, once and for all." Alex nodded, feeling the weight of the shadows they disturbed. They knew that to break the cycle, they'd need to confront whatever remained hidden in the depths of Willow Creek's ruins. As they prepared to return, the air grew colder, shadows beginning to form again in the debris, as if the manor itself were rising for one final confrontation. Part 7, the final release. Alex and Emma stepped back into the ruins, the chill of the shadows biting at their skin. Despite their exhaustion, they knew they had to face whatever remnant of darkness remained if they were to truly break Willow Creek Manor's hold. The faint whisper, "Not finished," lingered in the air, and shadows curled in the debris, awaiting their next move. Emma took a deep breath, her voice steady. "We've freed Lillian. Now we need to free this place." Following a path through the rubble, they returned to the center of what had once been the heart of the manor. There, beneath broken beams and shattered stone, lay the last remnants of the altar they had seen in the hidden room. Its faint markings pulsed weakly, as if barely clinging to life. They knelt by the remnants of the altar, placing their hands on the cold stone, and began the chant one final time, their voices joining together with a steady, unwavering determination. With each word, they felt the weight of the manor's dark history lifting, as if the shadows themselves were finally letting go. The air grew lighter, warmer. Rays of sunlight filtered through the broken ceiling, bathing the altar in a soft, golden glow. The shadows faded, pulling back into the earth, leaving only the gentle warmth of the morning light. The whisper came one last time, soft and clear, but now filled with a peaceful tone. "Thank you." It was Lillian's voice, and as the final shadow disappeared, they felt her presence lift, as if her spirit had finally found peace. Alex and Emma rose, the ruins quiet and still around them. The manor, once a place of shadows and sorrow, now felt serene, its dark energy lifted. They knew, without a doubt, that Willow Creek Manor's curse had been broken at last. They walked out of the ruins, a sense of lightness filling them both. For the first time, they felt free, as though they had left the weight of the darkness behind forever. As they reached the edge of the property, Alex turned back, smiling softly at the ruins. "It's over," he said, the relief evident in his voice. "It's finally over." Emma smiled, feeling a warmth that seemed to radiate from within. "We've given it peace. Now we can finally move on, too." They left Willow Creek Manor with the sunrise warming their backs, knowing that they had freed not only Lillian but all the spirits bound to the manor's sorrowful history. The weight of the darkness, once so oppressive, had dissolved, and in its place was a feeling of closure, a sense that they had brought light where there had once been only shadows. As they walked away, hand in hand, they knew that Willow Creek Manor would stand forever in silence, its haunting memories left to rest, and its secrets finally put to peace. Part 1. The Forgotten Asylum of Blackwood Grove. Blackwood Grove Asylum had been abandoned for decades, hidden deep within an overgrown forest. The building stood like a skeleton against the sky, its once grand walls twisted and crumbling. Local legends told of strange happenings, inhumane treatments, and mysterious disappearances. Most avoided the place, swearing that it was haunted by the spirits of those lost in its dark halls. But a group of friends, Eli, Matt, Rachel, and Chloe, weren't afraid of a few ghost stories. Determined to explore, they made a plan to spend the night in the asylum. Armed with flashlights, snacks, and a mixture of excitement and unease, they ventured into the forest under the light of a waning moon. The building came into view slowly, half shrouded in fog that seemed to cling to its broken windows. They paused, feeling a chill settle over them, as though they'd stepped into a world where time stood still. The asylum's front doors hung crooked on their hinges, the open entry like a gaping mouth. "Well, we're here," Matt said, trying to sound confident, though his voice wavered slightly. "No turning back now." Eli gave a reassuring nod, stepping toward the door. "Just an old building, right? What's there to worry about?" Chloe exchanged a nervous glance with Rachel, who shrugged and took a steadying breath. Together, they crossed the threshold, stepping into the darkness of the asylum's main hall. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and rot, and the beam from their flashlights revealed peeling wallpaper, cracked walls, and broken furniture scattered across the floor. "Welcome to Blackwood Grove Asylum," Chloe said, trying to sound cheerful, though her voice trembled slightly. "Population, us." They made their way deeper into the building, each step seeming to stir the dust into ghostly spirals in the flashlight beams. Scrawled graffiti covered the walls, warning messages from past explorers, *, "Don't stay after dark." *, "They never left." Eli laughed nervously, brushing his hand over one of the messages. "People really like to spook each other, huh?" he said, though he sounded more uncertain than he wanted to admit. As they continued down the hallway, the building felt larger, as if it were stretching around them. They tried to stay together, but the narrow passageways and endless doors made it easy to lose track of direction. They quickly found themselves lost, wandering the eerie corridors of the asylum with no idea how to get back. "Didn't we already pass this hallway?" Rachel whispered, shining her flashlight on a familiar-looking door. Matt nodded, his face tense. "It all looks the same, but yeah, I think we've been here before." They tried to retrace their steps, but every turn seemed to lead them deeper into the asylum. Their laughter faded, replaced by a tense silence as they realized the layout made no sense. It was as if the asylum were guiding them, twisting the corridors to trap them. Eventually, they entered a large, empty room with rows of metal beds, each fitted with leather straps and metal cuffs. Rust covered every surface, but the beds looked disturbingly intact, as though they had been left in a hurry and never touched again. The silence was suffocating. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Chloe said, shuddering as she looked around. "What were they even doing here?" Rachel shined her flashlight over a set of cabinets against the wall. Inside, she saw old patient files, the paper brittle and yellowed. She carefully picked one up, skimming the faded type. It detailed experimental treatments, extended isolation, and restraint therapies that sent chills down her spine. It was clear that this place hadn't been a refuge for the mentally ill, it had been a prison. "Guys, something terrible happened here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "These weren't treatments. They were experiments." Eli shifted uneasily, glancing back toward the door. Maybe we should get out of here. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from down the corridor, like a door slamming shut. They froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. Just the wind? Matt whispered, though his voice trembled. They continued through the asylum, the halls seeming to grow darker, colder. The faint sound of whispers seemed to follow them, vanishing whenever they turned to look, leaving only silence. Each room they passed was filled with disturbing relics, restraints, stained surgical tools, even what looked like padded cells with scratch marks on the walls. Finally, they found themselves in a room that looked like a doctor's office, with a large, rusted desk and several dusty medical files strewn about. An old, cracked patient chair sat in the corner, restraints hanging loosely from its arms. On the desk was an open journal, its pages filled with hurried, scrawled handwriting. Chloe leaned in, reading aloud. Asterisk, the shadows grow stronger. I can hear them at night, whispering, calling my name. The patients, they're gone, but their spirits linger. I fear I'll join them soon, asterisk. The journal entries grew more frantic, the handwriting erratic, describing strange phenomena, patients who vanished without a trace, voices echoing in empty rooms, and the constant feeling of being watched. A cold dread settled over the group as they realized the writer had been a doctor who'd once worked there, someone who had witnessed the asylum's darkest days. His last entry read simply, asterisk, one must stay. One must stay so the rest may go free. Asterisk. A sudden chill swept through the room, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Rachel backed away from the journal, her face pale. Did anyone else feel that? She asked, looking around nervously. But before anyone could answer, they heard it, a faint, desperate whisper from the hallway. Help me. They turned toward the sound, their flashlights sweeping over the empty corridor, but they saw nothing. Just darkness stretching endlessly before them. We need to leave, Matt said, his voice tight with fear. This place, it's not right. But as they turned to go, the door slammed shut, trapping them in the room. They ran to it, pulling, pushing, but it wouldn't budge. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. Then, as if from nowhere, a figure appeared at the far end of the hallway, a shadowy, indistinct form, standing perfectly still. They couldn't make out a face, but they felt its gaze, cold and penetrating, as it watched them with a silent, ominous presence. The figure took a step forward, its hand reaching out. And then, in a voice filled with sorrow and anger, it whispered again, one stays, the rest may go. They realized, horrified, that the asylum had trapped them with an ultimatum. If they wanted to leave, one of them would have to stay behind, bound to this place forever. Part 2. Despite their pact to leave the horrors of Greystone Hollow behind, the shadows of that night lingered, unsettlingly vivid in their minds. Days passed in a strange haze, but the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, only grew. Each night, Lucy, Ben, and Clara could sense it, a faint, creeping presence as they tried to sleep. What had followed them from the village was subtle, but it was there, just beyond their reach. Lucy was the first to break. A week after their visit, she woke in the middle of the night, shivering despite the warmth of her blankets. Her room felt unusually cold, and as she blinked, trying to clear the grogginess, she noticed something strange. There, in the corner of her room, was a dark shadow, a figure, just as they had seen in the village. It stood perfectly still, watching her with hollow eyes. She froze, her heart pounding. But before she could move, the shadow faded into the darkness, as if it had never been there at all. She tried to dismiss it as a trick of her mind, a nightmare lingering in her waking moments. But sleep did not come easily after that. The next day, she gathered Ben and Clara, hoping to find reassurance. When they met, she quickly saw the same fear mirrored in their faces. Ben confessed he'd seen the same figure, standing by his window one night, unmoving, watching him. Clara hadn't seen it directly, but she described a feeling of constant dread, as if something was lurking in every shadow, waiting for her to let her guard down. We never should have gone there, Lucy whispered, her voice shaking. That village, it was more than abandoned. Ben nodded, his face pale. It's like we've brought part of it back with us. These shadows, Whatever they are, they're not just memories. They debated what to do, but there were no answers. Greystone Hollow was an abandoned place, with no records, no history. It was a place people simply forgot about, a ghost village. What were they to tell anyone? That night, Lucy lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every shadow in her room feeling darker, heavier. She tried to ignore the sense of being watched, but it clung to her. Then, just as sleep was beginning to pull her under, a cold whisper filled her mind, echoing from somewhere far away. Return. The word filled her with dread, each syllable pressing against her like an icy hand. She sat up, looking around, but her room was empty. The whisper had sounded so close, so real, that she couldn't shake the feeling it was an invitation, a demand. The next day, she found herself at Ben's doorstep, a sense of urgency driving her to share what she'd heard. To her shock, he looked at her, eyes wide with the same fear. "I heard it too," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Last night." It was a single word, like a command. Return. Clara arrived not long after, her face pale, confirming she had heard the same whisper. They stared at each other, understanding dawning on them, the village was calling them back. Though every instinct told them to ignore it, to never return, the feeling only grew stronger. Each night, the shadows grew darker, pressing in around them, filled with whispers of return. They sensed that ignoring it would only make things worse, that the shadows would follow them endlessly unless they obeyed. After a few more nights of sleepless dread, the three friends made a decision. They would return to Greystone Hollow, confront whatever they had disturbed, and end this. Early the next morning, they set off, carrying only flashlights and the same map they had brought the first time. As they entered the forest that led to Greystone Hollow, the air grew colder, the mist thickening around them. This time, there was no sense of adventure, no thrill of discovery, only fear and a silent understanding that whatever awaited them would not be as passive as before. The village emerged from the mist, unchanged, frozen in time. The streets lay silent, the windows of the houses staring down at them like empty eyes. Shadows clung to every corner, darker and denser than the last time, as if waiting for their return. They reached the stone well in the center of the village, the place where the strange feeling of dread had first taken hold of them. The air felt heavier, pressing down on them, and each of them felt the urge to run. But they stood firm, refusing to let fear control them. Suddenly, a figure emerged from one of the houses, gliding silently across the ground. It was the same shadowy form they had seen before, hollow-eyed and silent, watching them with an intensity that made their skin crawl. But this time, the figure was not alone. More shadows stepped from the darkness, moving in unison, closing in around the friends. The three of them pressed together, gripping their flashlights as if the light alone could protect them. The figures stopped a few feet away, forming a silent circle, their eyes empty yet full of purpose. They made no sound, no movement, only watching, waiting. In the silence, the whisper came again, louder and clearer. "Return what you took." Lucy's voice trembled as she looked at her friends. "What did we take?" Ben shook his head, his voice barely audible. "We took nothing. But maybe we disturbed something." The shadows remained still, unmoving, as if they expected them to understand. Then Clara's eyes widened with realization. "The map," she whispered. "The map we used, it was left here, in this village. We took it when we left." Ben pulled the map from his pocket, staring down at it. The paper looked older now, more worn, as though it had aged with the village. Slowly, he stepped forward, holding the map out toward the shadows, hoping this would appease them. As he laid it at the edge of the well, the shadows seemed to soften, their edges blurring, the figures swaying slightly as if in acknowledgement. The darkness around them began to lift, the oppressive weight lessening as the shadows receded. The friends stood together, watching as the figures dissolved back into the mist, leaving the village empty once more. In silence, they turned and left, never daring to look back, knowing the village had released them, for now. Part 3. As they left Greystone Hollow, a heavy silence settled over them. The shadows had receded, and the whispers had faded, but the sense of dread lingered. They could feel the village watching, as if waiting to see if they would return. But they kept walking, determined not to look back. Days passed, and slowly, the eerie presence that had clung to them began to fade. At night, there were no more shadowy figures, no cold whispers echoing in their minds. It was as if Greystone Hollow had finally released them, allowing them to return to their lives. Yet, the village haunted them in memory, its silent streets, its hollow-eyed figures, and the chilling words, "Return what you took." But as the memories grew distant, something shifted. Their shared experience brought them closer, and they spent more time together, laughing about small things, grateful for each other's company. The terror of that village slowly transformed into something different, a reminder of their bond, of facing fear together and emerging stronger. One evening, a few weeks after their last visit to Greystone Hollow, Lucy invited Ben and Clara over to her house for a movie night. It felt like old times. The shadows and the village were no longer part of their lives. As they laughed and chatted, the experience at Greystone Hollow seemed like a bad dream, something they could finally leave behind. But then, as they settled into the evening, Clara noticed something odd. On Lucy's bookshelf, tucked behind a row of novels, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was old, yellowed with age, the edges worn. Curious, she pulled it out, recognizing it instantly, the map they had taken from Greystone Hollow. Lucy's face went pale as she saw it, her eyes widening with fear. "How did it get here?" she whispered, her voice shaking. They had left the map in the village. Ben had placed it by the well. But somehow, it had followed them back. They stared at the map in silence, a feeling of dread settling over them. But then, Clara took a deep breath and looked at her friends, determination flashing in her eyes. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe we don't need to fear it anymore. We left the map in the village, and whatever darkness was there, it's over. Maybe this is just a reminder of what we've faced together, of what we've overcome." Ben and Lucy exchanged a look, and slowly, they began to nod. They were done running from the shadows of Greystone Hollow. They had confronted the darkness together, faced their fears, and now they could finally let it go. Lucy carefully folded the map and placed it back on the shelf, this time as a symbol of their strength, a relic of a past that had tried to haunt them but had only strengthened their bond. From that day on, the map stayed there, untouched, a silent reminder of the fear they had faced and conquered. As the months passed, the shadows no longer haunted them, and the whispers from Greystone Hollow faded entirely. They moved forward, their friendship growing stronger, bound not by fear but by trust and resilience. They had ventured into darkness and emerged into the light, leaving the shadows behind. And so, Greystone Hollow returned to its silent, forgotten state, its secrets buried once again in the mist, waiting for the next travelers to uncover its mysteries. But for Lucy, Ben, and Clara, the village was just a memory, a shadow that had taught them courage and left them forever changed. In the end, they had taken something far more powerful than fear from Greystone Hollow. They had taken the strength to face any darkness that might come their way. In the quiet town of Ravenwood, a place known for its sprawling forests and rolling hills, there was a single house that no one spoke of. Tucked away at the edge of the old woods, the Thornfield estate stood abandoned for decades, its windows dark and roof partially caved in. The townsfolk, though curious about the stories surrounding the estate, kept their distance. Some said they had seen flickers of light in its windows at night, others whispered about eerie sounds coming from the woods around it. But the most chilling rumors were about the disappearances, people who entered Thornfield and were never seen again. For Jack, a newcomer to Ravenwood, the house was an irresistible mystery. A local historian with a fascination for old legends, he'd come to Ravenwood to study the town's curious history. Tales of lost hikers and ghostly figures in the forest only fueled his curiosity. But Thornfield, it held a special place in every town tale, as if the very land beneath it carried secrets too dark to share. As Jack began digging into the town's history, he discovered something odd. The few records about Thornfield Estate were all vague, incomplete, and filled with gaps. The house, once owned by the Thornfield family, was said to be cursed. Every family that had lived there faced untimely misfortune, strange illnesses, and, in some cases, vanished without a trace. People who had once been well-loved in the community seemed to slip from memory, as though erased. There were no photographs, no diaries, no records that could reveal what had happened to them. All that remained was a sense of dread and whispers of something dark living in the house. Despite the warnings, Jack found himself drawn to Thornfield, certain that whatever secrets lay hidden there would reveal themselves. He planned to make a short visit, just enough to snap a few photographs and maybe find a piece of the past left behind. But as he neared the house, he felt an oppressive silence descend around him. The forest, alive with birdsong moments before, grew still. The air felt colder, thicker. Shadows stretched and shifted as if watching him, waiting for his next move. Ignoring his growing unease, Jack stepped onto the cracked stone pathway leading to the front door. He took out his flashlight, clicking it on as he approached the entrance. The door, faded and scarred with time, seemed to loom larger as he neared, like a portal to another world. He reached out, his hand trembling, but before he could touch it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, empty hall that seemed to swallow the light. Jack hesitated, feeling a presence around him, an invisible weight pressing against him as though daring him to enter. And just as he took a cautious step forward, he heard it, a faint whisper, distant and echoing from deep within the house, calling his name as if it had been waiting. Unaware of the horrors he was about to uncover, Jack took a deep breath and crossed the threshold into Thornfield Estate, leaving the safety of Ravenwood behind.